Hi, my name is Liz David, and I am with Hope and Healing Therapy and Hope and Growth. Thanks so much for joining us today. Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the impact of our birth order in how we do things. Now, before we really take a deep dive into it, wanted to make sure that everyone understands that the impact of birth order is actually one part of the idea of the social constructs that make us who we are. As a systems therapist, one of the things I really subscribe to is the idea that we are a product of the environment that we came from. We see the world from a socially constructed point of view. And what that means is the way we were taught and the way that we learn to observe the world really helps shape what the world looks like to us today. So, as a result, knowing that social construction really gives us a lens on what we're looking at. Understanding where we are in birth order also gives us some insight on how we observe the world. And so, figured it would be valuable to talk a little bit about what birth order is, what it means, and then giving you some insight about how different children might actually be impacted by those birth order ideas in their childhood and adult life. So, with that, let's dig into it. The first thing we wanted to do was just talk about what birth order theory is. Birth order theory, at its core, was originally introduced by Alfred Adler, a psychologist in the 1920s who believed that a child's position in the family would influence their personality, behavior, and even their life choices. Murray Bowen was a family systems theorist who also complemented this concept by focusing on how sibling roles would fit within a larger family emotional system. And he would actually emphasize how individuals emotionally differentiate themselves from what family expectations were. Keeping in mind, the biggest thing I want to remind us all is that when we're talking about birth order, it is useful in the type of therapy I practice, which is understanding social construction. And when I say social construction, I am thinking about how we each have all come to have the views and perspectives that we do. Birth order plays a role in it. Obviously, there are going to be other factors that also play a role: culture, part of the country or the world that you grew up in, who your systems were, if you had both parents or only one, if you were raised by grandparents, if you were raised on your own. All of these different social constructs are going to help shape the way you view the world. Birth order is a part of that. So being able to understand how your role was kind of altered or your view was slightly shifted as a result of your birth order is valuable information as we continue on our journey to mental wellness. Again, it is not meant to be something that is completely gospel, something that we're supposed to go live our lives by or run and understand, but it shows its value in recognizing that it's another layer of who we are. Let's talk about firstborns. Firstborns, according to this theory, are considered the leaders. Firstborns will typically have traits that include being responsible, organized, ambitious, and they're often perceived as natural leaders. Murray Bowen added the additional commentary that firstborns often carry the emotional weight of parental expectations, which ends up leading them to be highly perfectionist and control oriented. They tend to overfunction in times of stress, which means that they take on caregiver roles for their siblings, and they're often seen as the go-to child for problem solving within the family. Additional traits that you might see with oldest child: high anxiety around failure, a need for validation. They're typically going to be decision makers, and they are going to be really, really high achieving. They want all the accomplishments, they want all those goals. Now, the kids who fit in between the first and the youngest are the middles. And middle children are typically considered your diplomats. Middle children traits are going to be diplomatic, they're going to be adaptable, and they're going to be skilled negotiators. They tend to build strong social connections outside of the family because they are seeking validation in external relationships. Bowen's theory also suggested that middle children may be less emotionally meshed with their parents, which gives them a little bit more emotional resilience and flexibility. Middle children are often your peacemakers. They have a tendency to balance the expectations placed on the firstborn with the freedom that the youngest children tend to have. The coolest thing about middle children, they have a tendency to be competitive. They look to seek differentiation, their own individuality away from their siblings. And they also have a tendency to really have a strong sense of fairness. Now we got through our first, we got through all of our middles. That could be 2 through 6 for however many kids are in your family. Next one is the youngest. The youngest children have a tendency to be the free spirits. Free spirits mean that they're charming, they're creative, they're actually willing to take risks. Youngest children often develop playful, humorous approaches to managing stress and family dynamics. One of the things Bowen emphasized about the youngest child is that they may actually develop a more carefree and adventurous attitude because they had less parental expectations and less scrutiny. But on the flip side, they might struggle with their identity as they try to differentiate themselves or separate themselves from their older siblings. A lot of times, youngest children are going to be seen as rebels who seem to be seeking attention and validation in very unconventional ways. Some other traits about youngest, they have a tendency to be creative thinkers. They're likely to explore non traditional careers. They're going to be open to new experiences, and they're also going to be risk takers. Now, what about those of you who were only children? Only children, according to these theories, are considered the independent ones. They have a tendency to be independent, conscientious, and mature. They're going to share a lot of traits with the firstborns, but they often exhibit higher levels of self-reliance, being able to depend on themselves because they didn't have siblings. According to Bowen, only children are going to struggle with some intimacy, and they're going to rely heavily on their adult relationships for validation. They often have a high level of self-understanding as they interact more with adults. They tend to be intellectual, introspective, and they're going to be gravitating towards some individualistic pursuits. Some other traits you're going to see in only children, they're going to have really high social adaptability, like they're going to do great connecting and getting into different social situations. They are going to do great in adult social settings. They're going to be really independent, and they're actually going to be comfortable with solitude and self-reliance. Now, some of the criticisms and nuance of understanding birth order, not all researchers agree on the influence of birth order. Some studies suggest that its effect on someone's personality is very little compared to environmental and family factors. We touched on that, how it's a piece of a layer of who a person is. And some researchers agree with that concept. Murray Bowen was very clear in identifying that birth order alone doesn't determine things. He actually said that rather, in addition to birth order, the emotional processes of the entire family are going to actually shape that personality. So that's going to be including how parents project their own emotional anxiety, how well each of the individuals differentiate themselves from the family, how they all engage. And Murray Bowen really believed that, again, the family system plays a bigger part, even though birth order has some influence. So, as a result, why are we talking about this? Because there's value in understanding that this is a starting point. This is an ability to begin to start seeing the layers of who you are, what actually helps you see the world, and how you can manage emotional stress and handle what's going on around you. If you're able to start observing how these things are actually playing out with yourself, with your siblings, with your children, it can actually help you start to understand clearly how people are engaging with each other and how to interact with them. So now that we understand what the philosophy is between each of the types of birth order, what some of the criticisms are of birth order, what do you think birth order's impact is on relationships and career choices? Well, firstborns often tend to gravitate towards leadership roles. They want to have some control, while middle children actually do a lot better in collaborative environments. And younger children, the youngest, have the tendency to want creative or entrepreneurial careers. Bowen's theory adds that the relationship dynamics are influenced by how well individuals can separate their emotional selves from their family roles. Firstborns might overfunction in relationships, while youngest children may be a little bit more freedom seeking, adventure seeking. The biggest thing to take away the biggest thing to take away from understanding birth order, or just understanding what the value of this type of information is for yourself, is that birth order provides a framework for what family dynamics is. The oldest child is going to be looking at their siblings as youngers, as people they might have to actually take care of. The middle child is going to be looking at their dynamics as having one sibling that's older who can teach them some things, one sibling that's potentially younger who has to learn from them. That's value in being able to understand what that family dynamic is going to look like. The biggest takeaways in understanding the value of birth order is that birth order provides a framework for understanding family dynamics. Murray Bowen's systems theory actually takes it a step further to actually say that having a good emotional environment is just as important as understanding where birth order plays into someone's evolution. It's really important that now that we have this information, we reflect on our own sibling position. And yes, there's going to be some value or some knowledge in what actually that birth order represents. But also, you need to make sure that you are thinking about how your family processes emotions. How did you guys deal with handling conflict, strife? How were your parents when it came to having those emotional, tough conversations? And how did your parents influence how you were shaped? The biggest thing to keep in mind is that while birth order shapes certain traits in each of us, it's going to be our emotional and our relational dynamics within our family that ultimately play the largest role in defining who we become. Beauty and having that understanding, beauty and understanding that our birth order is actually one of the most wonderful layers of who we truly are as a whole, but recognize that it's a layer as part of a whole. Celebrate that, continue to learn who your layers are, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.